The rancher teased her about love, then her quiet answer changed everything. Caleb Walker did not know a careless joke could chase a woman out of a dance hall. He did not know a few light words, spoken with a grin and a foolish heart, could leave a man standing under lantern light with his breath caught in his chest. But by the time Lydia Marlowe walked out into the cold Wyoming night, Caleb knew one thing for certain. Something between them had changed, and he was the last person in Cedar Bend to understand it. Before that night, most folks in town thought Caleb and Lydia were simply neighbors who enjoyed arguing too much. Their first real quarrel began over a mule. Not a wild horse, not a land deed, not a stolen calf. Just a gray, long-faced mule named Moses, who belonged to Lydia and seemed to believe Caleb's oat field was the promised land. Caleb found the animal standing knee-deep in his crop one bright September morning in 1883, chewing with slow, peaceful disrespect. The sun had barely climbed over the ridgeline. Dust still slept in the wagon tracks. Caleb stood by the broken section of fence with his sleeves rolled up, his jaw tight, and one boot planted on the lower rail. The mule looked at him and chewed harder. A minute later, Lydia Marlowe came up the road in a faded blue dress, her brown hair pinned in a hurry, carrying a rope in one hand and a look in her eyes that said she already knew what Caleb was about to say and had prepared 3 answers. "That mule of yours has eaten half a row," Caleb said. Lydia stopped beside the fence and looked past him at Moses. "Half a row seems like a strong charge without a witness." "I am the witness. You are also the complainant." Caleb stared at her. She gave him the smallest smile, not enough to be friendly, just enough to be dangerous. Caleb had known Lydia most of his life, but not well. Her father's place sat east of his, 40 acres of hard soil, plum trees, and one weather-beaten house with a porch that leaned as if tired of standing. After her father died the previous winter, Lydia stayed and worked the place alone. Folks said she should sell it. Folks said a woman had no business trying to keep land by herself. Folks said many things from warm chairs while Lydia carried feed sacks, patched roof leaks, and walked into town with her chin high. Caleb respected that. He also believed her mule had no respect for boundaries. "Your fence is down," he said. "Our fence," Lydia said. "My side is still standing." "Then your side looks proud, but it did not do its duty." Moses pulled another mouthful of oats. Caleb pointed at the mule. "That animal understands theft. That animal understands opportunity. He crossed onto my land. He followed the open path your rail left him. You make it sound like I invited him. You did leave the door open." Caleb looked from her to the mule, then back again. A laugh almost broke through him, but he caught it in time and turned it into a cough. He was not a laughing man, not much anymore. Since his mother passed and his younger brother left for Cheyenne, Caleb had grown used to quiet mornings, long work, and evenings with only the sound of wind pushing against the house. Laughter felt like something that belonged to other people. But Lydia Marlowe made it difficult to stay solemn. She stepped through the broken fence, gathered Moses by the halter, and patted his neck as if he were an innocent child. "I'll pay for what he ate," she said. "I didn't ask. I know that is why I offered." Caleb felt something soften in him, though he would not have named it. "The rail needs fixing." "I know. I'll bring a post this afternoon." "You do not have to." "I know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind moved through the oat field in a low golden wave. Lydia's hand rested on the mule's neck, but her eyes stayed on Caleb. They were steady eyes, gray with a little green in them, like creek water under cottonwood shade. He had the strange feeling she saw more than he meant to show. Then she said, "You always sound like a man arguing with himself before anyone else gets a chance." Caleb blinked. Lydia led Moses away before he could answer. That should have been the end of it. In Cedar Bend, it became the beginning. After the mule came the dispute over the creek crossing. Lydia claimed Caleb's cattle mudded the shallow bend too often. Caleb claimed water did not belong to either one of them just because Lydia had decided to take offense on its behalf. They settled the matter by laying flat stones along the bank, though they argued the entire time and both left satisfied. Then came the day Caleb's bay horse broke loose, and trampled through Lydia's bean patch. He found her standing in the garden with both hands on her hips, staring at the damage like a judge at sentencing. "She favors beans," Lydia said. "She favors freedom," Caleb replied. "She owes me supper." Caleb paid for the beans, then came back the next evening with flour, coffee, and a sack of sugar, too. Lydia looked into the sack, then up at him. "This is too much." "I miscalculated." "No, you did not." "No," he said, "I did not." Something quiet passed between them then. Neither of them touched it. Neither of them spoke of it. But after that, Caleb noticed her lamp across the fields at night. Lydia noticed when smoke rose from his chimney before dawn. They began meeting at the fence more often than trouble required. By October, Cedar Bend had started whispering. Mrs. Hattie Loomis at the Mercantile told everyone Lydia Marlowe and Caleb Walker were either meant for each other or meant to drive each other clear into the grave. Old Ben Rollins said there was little difference when two people were stubborn enough. The church ladies smiled too much when Caleb and Lydia stood near each other. The blacksmith asked Caleb if he needed another hinge for all that fence visiting. Caleb told them all they were fools, but he still shaved before the harvest supper. The hall was warm that night, full of fiddle music, lantern glow, and the smell of pies cooling near the back wall. Lydia wore a brown dress with small pearl buttons at the collar. It was plain, but on her it looked finer than silk. Caleb saw her the moment he entered and pretended he had not. For nearly an hour they stood near the cider table and argued about whether apple butter needed cloves. Caleb said it did. Lydia said cloves ruined honest apples. He told her she was severe. She told him he was easily led by spice. Then a young ranch hand named Will Porter walked over, hat in hand, cheeks red with courage. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "would you care to dance?" Caleb looked at Will, then he looked at Lydia. Something sharp moved under his ribs before he could stop it. Lydia waited, just one heartbeat, as if listening for something Caleb had not said. Caleb forced a grin. "Careful, Lydia. Keep turning men away, and one day folks will say no man in Wyoming is brave enough to marry you." The music carried on. The lantern above them swung slightly in the rafters. Lydia's face changed so softly that only Caleb saw it. The smile stayed, but the light behind it trembled. She stepped close enough that he caught the scent of cold air and lavender soap on her sleeve. In a voice meant for him alone, she whispered, "Maybe I was only waiting for one brave man to ask." Then she turned, refused Will with a gentle word, and walked out of the hall without looking back. Caleb stood there with the sound of the fiddle around him, the cider cup cold in his hand, and the terrible feeling that he had just been handed the truth too late. Caleb did not follow Lydia at once. That was the part he hated remembering later. He stood inside the harvest supper with music swinging around him, boots nailed to the floor by pride and confusion. Will Porter slipped away toward the far side of the hall, wiser than he looked. A few people glanced at Caleb, then glanced toward the door Lydia had used, then found sudden interest in their cider cups. Caleb set his own cup down on the table, so hard a little cider spilled over the rim. Hattie Loomis watched him from beside the pie board. She did not say a word, which made Caleb more uneasy than if she had shouted. He pushed through the hall door into the night. Cold air struck his face, the kind of cold that woke a man up and made him honest whether he wanted to be or not. The lantern over the doorway rattled in the wind. Wagons stood in a crooked line near the hitching rail. Horses shifted and blue-white mist into the dark. Lydia was not there. Her mare Juniper was gone too. Caleb walked to the edge of the road and looked east, where the moon laid a silver strip across the wagon tracks. He saw nothing but dust settling, pale grass bending, and the empty road leading toward the Marlowe place. He almost went after her. His hand was already on his horse's reins when shame stopped him. What would he say? That he had not meant it, that he had only been teasing, that he had spent months standing across fences and creeks from her like a fool, enjoying the warmth of her company while pretending it was no more than neighborly habit. Maybe I was only waiting for one brave man to ask. The words sat inside him like a coal. Caleb did not feel brave then. He felt slow, blind, and angry at himself. So he did the thing stubborn men often do when their hearts are frightened. He waited too long. He rode home an hour later under a sky sharp with stars. The fields lay quiet on both sides of him. Far off, a coyote called once and went silent. He passed the broken rail where Moses the mule had first crossed into his oats, and even in the dark Caleb could see the new post he had set there, straight and strong. It seemed foolish now, how quickly he had fixed a fence and how slowly he had understood a woman. His house was dark when he reached it. He unsaddled his horse, rubbed him down, and stood in the barn longer than needed, listening to the soft pull of hay and the creak of wood in the wind. Then he went inside and lit the lamp. The kitchen looked the same as always. Tin plates on the shelf, coffee pot near the stove, his father's old coat still hanging by the door because Caleb had never found the strength to move it. Yet everything felt altered, as if Lydia's quiet sentence had crossed his threshold before him. He sat at the table until the lamp burned low. He thought of her at the fence, one hand resting on Moses's neck. He thought of the way she carried herself in town when men spoke to her like she was a child. He thought of her eyes when he made that careless joke. Not angry, not wounded in a loud way, worse than that. Tired as if she had hoped for more from him and had finally run out of room to hope. Near dawn, Caleb stood, washed his face in cold water and made a decision. He would go to her. Not with flowers. Flowers felt too soft for a woman who had held a roof beam in place during a spring storm and hammered it back herself. Not with poetry. Lydia would likely stare at him until the words died of embarrassment. He would go with truth. By the time the sun rose, he had saddled his horse and ridden east across the frost-stiff grass. His breath clouded in front of him. The Marlowe place came into view under the pale morning light. The porch sagged at one corner. Smoke rose from the chimney. A milk pail sat by the step. Juniper stood in the small corral, ears forward. Caleb stopped near the gate and removed his hat. Lydia was in the yard, carrying a sack of feed from the shed. She wore a dark shawl around her shoulders, and her hair was pinned low at the back of her neck. She saw him, but she did not smile. That hurt more than he expected. "Morning," he said. "Morning. I came to speak with you." "You usually do," she said, but the words had no play in them. Caleb stepped down from the saddle. Dust and frost clung to his boots. His hand tightened on his hat brim. For a man who could face a half-wild bull without flinching, he found it hard to meet her eyes. "About last night," he began. Lydia shifted the feed sack against her hip. "You made a joke." "I made a poor one." "Yes. I did not mean to shame you." Her face softened for the smallest moment, then closed again. "I know that." "I did not mean to make light of you either." "No," she said quietly. "You only made light of something I should not have let matter." That sentence struck him low. "Lydia," he said, taking one step closer, "it does matter." She looked at him then, really looked. Hope flickered there, guarded and careful, like a lantern cupped from wind. Before Caleb could say more, a wagon rolled up the road behind him. Both of them turned. It was Mr. Amos Bell from the Cedar Bend Bank, sitting stiff beside a narrow man in a black coat Caleb had never seen before. The wagon wheels crunched over the frozen ruts and stopped at Lydia's gate. Amos would not meet Lydia's eyes. The stranger did. He climbed down slowly, holding a leather folder against his chest. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I regret the early call, but business cannot wait." Lydia's fingers tightened around the feed sack. The color left her face so quickly that Caleb forgot his own fear. "What business?" Caleb asked. The stranger glanced at him with polite dislike. "Marlowe business." Lydia set the sack down carefully, as if one wrong movement might break something inside her. "It is all right, Caleb," she said. But her voice was too thin. The man in the black coat opened his folder and drew out a paper with a red county seal. Caleb saw Lydia's name written across the top. Beneath it, in hard printed letters, were words that turned the cold morning colder. "Notice of public sale." Caleb looked at Lydia. She looked away. The paper in the stranger's hand seemed to take all the warmth out of the morning. Lydia stood beside the feed sack with her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, but Caleb could see she was not cold from the weather alone. Her face had gone still in the way a person goes still when they have already been afraid of something for a long time and have finally watched it arrive. Amos Bell cleared his throat. He was a round man with silver spectacles and a habit of sweating even in winter, but that morning his face looked gray. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "I am sorry, truly I am. I tried to allow more time." The narrow man in the black coat gave Amos a sharp look. "The bank has allowed more time than the note required." Caleb stepped closer. "What note?" Lydia did not answer. The stranger looked at Caleb as if he were an unlatched gate. "Mr. Walker, I presume this does not concern you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Most things that frighten my neighbor concern me." Lydia turned to him quickly. "Caleb." Her voice held warning, but beneath it was something more painful. Shame. That stopped him. The man in black drew himself straighter. "My name is Edmund Pike. I represent a buyer from Laramie interested in the Marlowe property should the bank proceed with sale. The debt has passed its final grace period. Unless the full amount is paid before noon next Friday, the property will be auctioned on the courthouse steps." Caleb looked at Amos. "How much?" "Caleb, do not," Lydia said. "How much?" Amos swallowed. $187 plus fees. The number hung there. It was not small. Not for a woman working 40 acres alone. Not for a rancher whose good year could turn bad with one storm, one sickness in the herd, one dry creek. But it was not impossible either, and that made Caleb's anger rise. "You were going to let her lose land over that?" he asked. Amos looked wounded. "I did not set the terms." "No," Pike said smoothly. "Her father did." Lydia flinched. Caleb saw it, a small thing, barely a movement, but it told him the wound was older than that morning. Pike folded the paper once and held it out. Lydia took it with fingers that trembled only after the paper touched her hand. "I will settle it," she said. Pike's mouth bent, not quite a smile. "I hope you do, though I would advise you not to rely on hope alone." Caleb took one step toward him before he knew he had moved. Pike's eyes flicked down to Caleb's hands, then back up. Caleb had not raised them, but he did not need to. Amos hurried back toward the wagon. "We should go." Pike tipped his hat to Lydia. "Good morning, Miss Marlowe." The wagon rolled away, leaving wheel marks in the frost, and a silence so heavy the mule in the small pen stopped chewing. For a long moment, Lydia stared at the notice. Caleb waited. He had many questions, but for once in his life he had the sense not to throw them at her like stones. At last she folded the paper and tucked it into the pocket of her skirt. "You should go home." "No." Her eyes lifted. "No. No. Caleb, I am not in the humor for another fence-line argument." "Then do not make it one." A bitter little laugh escaped her. It did not sound like her. "That is rich coming from you." He took that because he deserved it. She turned away and lifted the feed sack as if it weighed nothing, though Caleb could see the strain in her shoulders. She carried it to the small shed, and he followed at a careful distance. The yard felt different now. The house looked smaller. The sagging porch was no longer just a porch in need of repair. It was a thing being threatened. The plum trees near the side wall were not just trees. They were roots in the ground. When Lydia came out of the shed, Caleb was still there. She wiped her hands on her apron. "My father borrowed money after the drought 3 years ago. He did not tell me how much. He thought spring would fix it. Spring did not. Then he got sick." "And you have been paying it alone?" "As best I could." "Why did you not tell anyone?" Her eyes sharpened. "Who?" "Me." The word came out before he could soften it. Lydia stared at him, and something in her face opened just enough to show the hurt beneath. "You were my neighbor," she said. "A good one, a difficult one, but still only my neighbor." "Only?" The word cut him deeper than it had any right to. "I can lend it to you," he said. Her chin rose. "No." "Lydia." "No." "It would save the place. It would put my father's debt into your hands. I would not hold it over you." "I know that." Her voice broke slightly, and she hated it. He could tell by the way she turned her face toward the barn. "That is part of the trouble." The wind moved through the yard. A loose piece of tin on the shed roof clicked softly. Caleb wanted to step closer, but he stayed where he was. "Then let me help another way," he said. She looked back at him. Why? He could have said because it was neighborly. He could have said because no decent person would stand by and watch land be taken. He could have said many safe things. But the truth from last night stood between them, waiting. "Because you matter to me," he said. Lydia's eyes filled, but no tears fell. She was too proud for that in daylight. The words had come too late to be easy, and too early to be enough. She drew a breath. "I have until Friday. I will find a way." "How?" "I have my mother's brooch, my father's saddle, 2 milk cows, maybe juniper if I must." "No," Caleb said. The thought of Lydia selling her mare, the one creature that had carried her through 2 hard years, made something fierce rise in him. She gave him a sad smile. "You do not get a say in everything, Caleb Walker." "I know." "Do you?" He looked at her. "I am learning." For the first time that morning, her expression softened. Just a little. Just enough to remind him of the woman who argued over cloves and apple butter. Then Moses the mule brayed from the pen, loud and awful, as if he had an opinion on the matter. Lydia shut her eyes for one brief second. Caleb nearly smiled, but did not. The moment was too fragile. If this moment touched your heart, stay with the story, because some debts are counted in dollars, and some are counted in silence. By mid-morning, Caleb rode into Cedar Bend with the taste of unsaid words still bitter in his mouth. He went first to the bank. Amos Bell was not glad to see him. "I cannot discuss Miss Marlowe's affairs," Amos said, adjusting his spectacles. "You already brought them to her yard with a buyer beside you." That was formal notice. That was a vulture in a black coat. Amos looked toward the window, nervous. "Pike is not the buyer. He is only acting for one." "Who?" "I cannot say." Caleb leaned both hands on the bank counter. "Amos." The banker swallowed. "I cannot say because I do not know. The offer came through Pike, cash ready after auction. That is all." Caleb studied him and believed him. He left the bank with more anger than answers. Outside, Cedar Bend moved as if nothing had changed. A wagon creaked past. Children ran near the church steps. The blacksmith's hammer rang bright in the cold air. Then Caleb saw Edmund Pike across the street, speaking to a man near the hotel porch. The man had his back turned, tall and straight, wearing a dark brown coat too fine for Cedar Bend. When he shifted, Caleb saw a silver watch chain flash at his vest. Pike handed him a folded paper. The man tucked it inside his coat and turned just enough for Caleb to see his face. Caleb stopped in the middle of the street. He knew that face. Daniel Voss, the railroad agent who had tried to buy half the valley last spring and smiled every time a rancher said no. Now he wanted Lydia's land. And Caleb suddenly understood this was not just about an old debt. Caleb did not cross the street at once. He stood there with wagon dust moving around his boots and watched Daniel Voss speak to Edmund Pike like a man discussing the weather, not a woman's home. Voss had the clean look of money. His coat was brushed, his boots shined, and his hat sat at the perfect angle. Nothing about him seemed hurried. That made Caleb dislike him more. Voss looked toward the east road, the road that led to Lydia's place, and smiled faintly. Caleb crossed then. Pike saw him first. His narrow face tightened. Voss turned a second later, and his smile widened as if Caleb were an expected guest. "Mr. Walker," Voss said, "Cedar Bend is a small place. A man cannot take 2 steps without meeting an old friend." "We are not friends," Caleb said. Voss placed one gloved hand over his heart. "That wounds me." "I doubt it." Pike slid the folded paper deeper into his coat. Caleb noticed. Voss noticed him noticing. "You seem troubled," Voss said. "Is this about Miss Marlowe's unfortunate position?" Caleb's hands curled once at his sides, then opened. He would not give Voss the pleasure of seeing temper lead him around like a bridled horse. "It is about you waiting for her land to fall. Land changes hands every day." "Not like this." Voss gave a soft laugh. "You ranchers do love to make business sound like a church sermon." Caleb stepped close enough that Pike shifted back. "Why her place?" Voss looked past Caleb toward the far hills. Because her place sits where the new freight spur may come through, should the survey be approved. 40 acres is not much to a cattleman, but to a railroad man, the right 40 acres can open a door. The words hit Caleb hard. He had heard talk of a spur line months earlier, but nothing certain. Most folks had laughed it off. Cedar Bend was too small, too dusty, too easily passed by. But if Voss knew more than he should, if men in Cheyenne had already marked the valley on maps, Lydia's land was not being taken because of an old debt. It was being hunted. Does she know? Caleb asked. Voss smiled again. Would it matter? It would to any decent man. Decency is often another word for being slow. Caleb leaned in. You will not get that land. Voss's smile faded just enough to show the iron beneath it. You do not own it. No, but I know who does. Until Friday. That was the word that followed Caleb all the way back to his horse. Friday. He rode from the bank to the mercantile, then to the blacksmith, then to the feed store, asking questions without saying too much. By noon, he had gathered enough to make his stomach turn. Pike had been in town 3 times over the past month. Amos Bell had been nervous for weeks. Voss had paid cash for 2 small lots near the South Road under another man's name. And one old survey marker had appeared near Cottonwood Creek, half hidden in grass. Caleb found it before sunset. A thin stake, a strip of red cloth, numbers burned into the wood. He stood beside it, looking across the bend toward Lydia's place. Her roof caught the last light. A ribbon of smoke rose from her chimney. Beyond her barn, the land sloped gentle and open, perfect for tracks, stock pens, and freight wagons. Perfect for taking. When he rode to her house, Lydia was on the porch with a sewing basket beside her and the notice folded on her lap. She did not seem surprised to see him. A lamp burned in the window behind her, and the light made her face look softer than it had that morning, though worry still sat there. You found out, she said. About Voss. She looked down, about the spur. Caleb stopped at the bottom step. You knew. Not for certain. My father suspected before he died. He found a railroad map in the county office when he went about taxes. Nothing official, just lines drawn in pencil. One line crossed our creek. Why did you not tell me? Lydia's fingers touched the folded paper. Because every time a man hears land may be worth something, his voice changes. His answer came quiet. Mine would not have. She looked at him then, tired and sad. I wanted to believe that. Caleb felt the sting of it, but he did not turn away. And now? I do not know. Those 5 words were worse than anger. He climbed one step and rested his hand on the porch post. The wood was rough beneath his palm. Let me help you fight this. I told you I will not take your money. I am not asking to hand you money. Then what? Time, work, witnesses, truth. If Voss wants that land so badly, then there may be something wrong with how he is moving to get it. Lydia shook her head. Men like him do wrong in ways that look proper on paper. Then we find better paper. For the first time, her mouth almost curved. Almost. You make that sound simple. It will not be. Caleb. He waited. Her voice dropped. There is something else. A horse shifted near the corral. Somewhere in the dark, Moses gave a low, displeased snort. The porch lamp flickered when wind slipped under the roof. Lydia stood and went inside without inviting him, but she left the door open. Caleb remained on the porch, unsure whether to follow. A moment later, she returned carrying a small wooden box. It was old and dark, with one brass corner bent and a lock that no longer held. She set it on the porch rail and lifted the lid. Inside were letters tied with a blue ribbon, a silver brooch wrapped in cloth, and a folded deed with worn edges. My father kept this hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk, she said. I found it after the funeral. Caleb looked at the deed. What is it? The first deed to this place, before my father bought it. She unfolded it carefully. Caleb leaned closer as the lamplight caught the faded ink. A name was written there, not Marlowe. Eleanor Whitcomb. My mother, Lydia said. Caleb looked at her. Lydia's hand trembled over the page. Everyone thinks my father owned this land and left me his debt, but this place belonged to my mother first. She brought it into the marriage. He borrowed against it after she died, but I do not know if he had the right. Caleb felt the air change around them. The old debt, the bank notice, Voss's plan, all of it shifted on a new hinge. Lydia, he said slowly, if your father did not have the right to pledge the land, the bank may not have the right to sell it. Her eyes held his, bright with fear and a hope she did not trust yet. I need the marriage record, she whispered, and my mother's full deed record. They may be in the county archive. Then we go tomorrow. She folded the paper fast, as if afraid the wind might steal it. Voss may already know. A sound came from beyond the porch. Not a mule, not Juniper. A boot scraping gravel. Caleb turned sharply toward the dark side of the house, and Lydia's hand flew to the wooden box. Someone had been standing near the window, listening. Caleb moved before Lydia could speak. He stepped off the porch and into the yard, one hand low at his side, eyes fixed on the shadow near the house. The moon was thin and clouds dragged across it like torn cloth. For a moment everything seemed still. The plum trees, the corral, the slant-roofed shed. Then a figure broke from the dark and ran toward the back gate. Stop, Caleb shouted. The man did not stop. Caleb went after him, boots striking hard against the packed dirt. Lydia's lantern swung behind him, throwing wild light across the yard. The stranger reached the gate, caught his coat on a nail, tore loose, and stumbled into the road. Caleb nearly had him by the shoulder when Moses, the mule, chose that exact moment to lunge his long head over the fence and let out a bray loud enough to wake the dead. The stranger jerked sideways in fear. Caleb slipped on loose gravel and hit one knee. By the time he recovered, the man had vanished into the cottonwoods beyond the creek, leaving only the sound of breaking brush. Caleb stood, breathing hard. Lydia came down from the porch with the lantern lifted high. Her face was pale, but her mouth was set firm. Did you see him? Not enough, Caleb said. Medium build, dark hat, moved like he knew the yard. She looked toward the cottonwoods. Pike. No, too quick for Pike, younger. The wind moved through the trees, soft and cold. Caleb looked down near the gate. Something pale lay in the dirt where the stranger had torn free. He bent and picked it up. A scrap of brown wool. Lydia stared at it. That could belong to half the men in town. Maybe. He turned it over in his fingers. A few threads of black stitching clung to the edge. Not much. Not enough to name a man, but enough to know the listener had not been a passing drifter. He had come close to the window on purpose. Caleb looked back at the house. You should not stay here alone tonight. Lydia's eyes snapped to him. I am not leaving my home because someone crept around it. I did not say leave it forever. And I did not ask to be guarded like a child. He swallowed the answer that rose too quickly. The old Caleb would have argued back. The old Caleb would have planted his boots and tried to win. But the look on Lydia's face was not stubbornness only. It was fear fighting for dignity. So he softened his voice. I know you are not a child, he said. I know you have held this place together with your own hands, but whoever listened tonight heard about that deed. If Voss wants your land bad enough, he may try to get those papers before we reach the county office. Lydia's hand tightened around the wooden box. The anger in her eyes faded into something quieter. I cannot lose them. You will not. She looked at him then, and for once there was no teasing between them, no fence-line game to hide behind. Only the truth of two people standing in a cold yard while danger found its way toward the porch. At last she nodded. You can sleep in the barn. I intended to. I have blankets. I have known worse than hay. I am sure you have, she said, and the smallest trace of the old Lydia came back. But that does not mean you must brag about it. Caleb almost smiled. They carried the wooden box inside. Lydia wrapped the deed and letters in oilcloth, tied them with string, and placed them beneath a loose floorboard under her mother's old rocking chair. Caleb turned away while she hid them, not because she asked, but because trust sometimes began with not looking. Later, he sat in the barn with his back against a hay bale and his rifle across his knees, though he hoped he would not need it. Moonlight slipped through the wall cracks in thin silver lines. Juniper dozed in her stall. Moses stood nearby, watching Caleb as if the whole trouble were his fault. "You could have let me catch him," Caleb muttered. The mule flicked one ear. Near midnight, Lydia came to the barn door with a quilt over her arm. "You awake?" she asked. "Yes." She stepped inside. The lantern in her hand made the shadows move gently along the rafters. She held out the quilt. "It gets colder before dawn." Caleb took it. Their fingers brushed, and both of them grew still for a breath too long. "Thank you," he said. She did not leave right away. Instead, she looked toward the stalls, then at the loft, then anywhere but his face. "My father was not a bad man," she said quietly. Caleb waited. He made mistakes, prideful ones. He thought every hardship could be outworked. When Mother died, he changed. He stopped asking advice, stopped opening letters, stopped sleeping some nights. I used to find him at the kitchen table with papers spread before him, staring like the numbers were speaking a language he could not bear to hear. Her voice stayed steady, but her hand trembled around the lantern handle. "I was angry with him after I found the debt. Then I was ashamed for being angry. Then I was angry again. Grief does that. It makes a person feel like two horses tied to the same post, pulling opposite ways." Caleb looked down at the quilt in his hands. "My father left debts too," he said. "Not money, silence. After Ma died, he walked around the house like all feeling had been packed away with her dresses. I learned from him. I thought if a man did his work, kept his word, and did not ask too much of anyone, that was enough." Lydia looked at him. "And is it?" "No," Caleb said, "not anymore." The barn grew quiet except for the soft shifting of the horses. Lydia's eyes shone in the lantern light. "Last night hurt me because I had already made a fool of myself in my own heart." "You did not. I waited for you to see something I never dared say plain. I see it now. That does not fix everything." "I know." His honesty seemed to reach her more than any promise could have. She nodded once, but her face carried a sorrow that had not yet decided whether it could trust hope. If you believe a heart can change when it finally tells the truth, stay close to this story, because Caleb and Lydia's hardest test is still coming. At first light, they rode for the county seat with the hidden papers tucked inside Lydia's saddlebag. Caleb had wanted to carry them, but Lydia only gave him one look, and he wisely said nothing more. She looked at his hand, then at him. Still trying to help without asking. He drew his hand back. "Yes. At least you admit it now." "I am improving." "A little." That little carried more warmth than he deserved, and he held it carefully. By mid-morning, the county courthouse came into view, a square brick building with tall windows and a flag snapping in the wind. Wagons stood along the rail. Men moved in and out with papers under their arms. Caleb felt Lydia slow beside him. "What is it?" he asked. She stared at the courthouse steps. Edmund Pike stood near the front doors. Beside him was Daniel Voss. And between them, holding a ring of keys and wearing a county clerk's badge, stood Lydia's cousin, Frank Marlowe, the one man who had handled her father's papers after the funeral. Lydia stopped her mare so suddenly that Juniper tossed her head. Caleb followed her gaze to the courthouse steps, and the shape of the trouble became clear. Edmund Pike stood stiff and smug beside Daniel Voss, but it was Frank Marlowe who made Lydia's face turn white. Frank was her father's nephew, a narrow-shouldered man with sandy hair and restless hands. He had not come by much after the funeral, though he had been full of soft words beside the grave. Caleb remembered him standing there in a black coat too large for him, telling Lydia that family must look after family. Now he stood with the men trying to take her home. Lydia's fingers closed around the saddlebag strap. Caleb leaned closer. "Do not show them fear." "I am not afraid," she said. But her voice told a harder truth. She was afraid, and she was furious that fear had found her in public. They tied the horses near the rail and walked toward the courthouse. Voss saw them first. His smile came smooth and cold. "Miss Marlowe," he said, "what a surprise." "No, it is not," Lydia replied. "You knew I would come." Pike made a soft sound in his throat. Frank looked down at the keys in his hand and would not meet her eyes. Lydia stepped past Voss as if he were dust on the road. Frank. Her cousin raised his head at last. Lydia. You are working here. Temporary help. Mr. Hanley has been ill. You handled my father's records. Frank swallowed. I helped settle what I could. What did you settle, Frank? Voss's smile faded a little. Miss Marlowe, grief can make a person suspicious. Lydia turned to him. Then let grief speak. It has better manners than you. Caleb nearly smiled, but the moment was too sharp for it. They entered the courthouse together. The air inside smelled of old paper, stove smoke, and damp wool. A clerk's desk stood near the back wall, with shelves of ledgers rising behind it like a dark wooden mountain. Frank hurried behind the counter and fumbled with the keys. Lydia placed both hands on the worn wood. I need the deed record for the Marlowe property before my father's purchase. I also need the marriage record for Thomas Marlowe and Eleanor Whitcomb. Frank shifted one ledger, then another. Records that old may be stored upstairs. Then bring them down. Pike stepped close. There is no need for this performance. The bank holds a signed note. A signed note is not the same as a lawful claim, Caleb said. Voss looked at him. You have become very informed overnight. I listen when it matters. Lydia did not look at Caleb, but something in her shoulders eased. Frank unlocked a cabinet and pulled out a large brown ledger. His hands shook as he opened it. Pages whispered under his fingers. He turned too quickly, then stopped. Here, he said, Thomas Marlowe land transfer 1869. Lydia leaned over the page. Caleb stood beside her, close enough to see the names written in faded ink. Thomas Marlowe had filed a claim after marriage, but the line naming previous owner had been scraped thin. Someone had rubbed at the paper until the ink blurred. Lydia's breath caught. This was altered. Frank closed the ledger half an inch. Old ink fades. Not like that. Caleb reached out and held the book open. Where is the original deed book? Frank licked his lips. Misplaced. Misplaced, Lydia repeated. It happens. No, she said, voice low. A pan can be misplaced. A button can be misplaced. A deed book does not walk away from a courthouse shelf. A heavy silence filled the room. Voss sighed as if bored. This is sad to watch. Miss Marlowe, your father borrowed money. The note was recorded. The debt is unpaid. All this digging through old sorrow will not change Friday. Lydia turned to him. Her eyes had tears in them now, but they did not fall. You knew my mother owned that land. Voss gave no answer. Frank did. He looked at her then, and guilt broke across his face before he could hide it. Lydia saw it. Oh, Frank, she whispered. Her cousin's mouth trembled. I did not know what they meant to do at first. Caleb stepped forward. What did they pay you for? Frank looked toward Voss in panic. Voss's voice sharpened. Say nothing. That was answer enough. Frank backed away from the counter. I only copied a few pages, that is all. Mr. Pike said the railroad needed clear records. He said there was nothing wrong in it. And after that, Lydia asked. Frank gripped the edge of the desk. They asked where your father kept papers. I told them I did not know. But you did, she said. Frank's eyes filled. I told them about the desk, the bottom drawer. I was drunk, Lydia. I was angry. Your father always thought less of my side of the family. I never meant for them to hurt you. The memory of the listener outside Lydia's window passed between her and Caleb like a cold hand. Lydia took one step back, as if she could not bear the nearness of him. You led them to my house. No, I swear I did not. I only said where he kept things. I did not know there was anything left. Pike moved fast around the counter, not toward Lydia but toward Frank. Enough. Caleb blocked him. No one struck anyone, no chair broke, no pistol came out, but the room tightened like a rope in a storm. Voss spoke softly. Mr. Marlowe is confused. He has a fondness for drink and a weak memory. Frank stared at Voss, and for the first time, shame turned into fear. You said nobody would lose anything unless the law allowed it. The law does allow it, Voss said. Lydia opened her saddlebag and pulled out the old deed, wrapped in oilcloth. Caleb felt every eye in the room fix on it. My mother's deed, she said. Eleanor Whitcomb owned the land before my father ever signed a note. If her marriage contract protected it, then my father's debt cannot take it from me. Frank looked at the deed as if it were a ghost. Then he whispered there was a contract. Lydia froze. What? Frank's voice dropped so low they all leaned toward him. I saw it once. Years ago, your mother's name, her father's seal. It said the land was to remain in her line. Your father kept it separate. He told me never to speak of it because men would laugh at him for living on his wife's land. Where is it? Caleb asked. Frank closed his eyes. Not here. Lydia's hope flickered. Then where? Frank looked at the courthouse window, toward the road that led north out of town. Your mother's trunk, he said. The one your father sent away after she died. He could not bear seeing her things in the house. Lydia's voice shook. Sent where? Frank looked at Voss, then back at Lydia. To Mercy Whitcomb, he said. Your mother's sister in Abilene. The name landed like thunder. Lydia had not heard from her aunt in 12 years. And Abilene was 3 days away, while the auction was in 4. For a moment, no one in the courthouse moved. Abilene. The word seemed too far away for such a small room. Lydia stood with her mother's deed in her hand, staring at Frank as if he had named the moon. 3 days there if the roads held, 3 days back if the horses did not fail, 4 days until the auction. Caleb did the counting in his head and felt the answer turn bitter. There is no time, Pike said. He sounded pleased. Lydia's head turned slowly toward him. You have been waiting to say that. Pike adjusted one cuff. I am only stating fact. No, Caleb said, you are stating hope. Voss gave a dry smile. Hope is Miss Marlowe's habit, not mine. Lydia folded the old deed with great care, but Caleb saw the tremor in her fingers. She slid it back into the oilcloth, then into the saddlebag. Her face had gone calm, and Caleb had begun to understand that Lydia's calm was often where she put pain when there was no safe place for it. She turned to Frank. Mercy Whitcomb still lives in Abilene. Frank nodded. Last I heard, she ran a boarding house near the South Cattle Yards, blue shutters, a sign with a painted dove. Did you ever write her? No. Did father? Frank lowered his eyes. Not after your mother died. Lydia looked away. Something old moved across her face, something deeper than debt or land. Caleb remembered what she had said in the barn about grief pulling a person 2 ways. Now he saw another rope tied to her heart, a mother gone, an aunt lost to silence, a trunk sent away because a grieving man could not bear the sight of dresses, letters, and hair ribbons. Voss stepped toward the door. This has been moving, but it changes nothing. Friday at noon, the sale proceeds. Lydia faced him. Not if I bring that contract. You cannot. Then why do you look worried? Voss's smile thinned. Caleb noticed that too. They left the courthouse with the cold light of afternoon falling across the steps. Outside, the town had kept moving. A woman carried a basket of laundry. A boy led 2 goats down the lane. The blacksmith's hammer struck iron in the distance. Ordinary sounds, as if the world had not just narrowed to 4 days and a road to Abilene. Lydia walked to Juniper and rested her forehead briefly against the mare's neck. Caleb gave her the small privacy of turning toward the street. He saw Pike and Voss speaking near the hotel, their heads closed together. Frank had not come out of the courthouse. We ride north, Lydia said. Caleb turned back. Today. Now. It will be dark before we reach Red Hollow. Then we will reach it in the dark. Lydia. She looked at him, eyes bright and fierce. Do not tell me what is sensible. Sensible has been used against me all morning. I was going to say we need fresh food, blankets, grain, and a second horse. The sharpness in her face eased a little. Oh. I know you can ride. I know you can endure cold. But we do this right or we do not make it. She looked down, then nodded once. Right then. Within the hour they were ready. Caleb bought flour, coffee, dried apples, bandages, and 2 heavy blankets from Hattie Loomis. Hattie packed twice what he paid for and tied the bundle herself. She is not alone in this, is she? Hattie asked, keeping her voice low. No. Good, see that you remember it when remembering matters. Caleb met her eyes. I will. Hattie slipped a small jar of peach preserves into the bag. For the road, hard things go down better with sweetness. When Caleb brought the supplies outside, Lydia was speaking to old Ben Rollins near the hitching rail. Ben held his hat in both hands, his weathered face troubled. I knew your mother, Ben said softly. She had a laugh like a bell and a spine like oak. If she made a contract to protect that land, she meant it to hold. Lydia's mouth trembled. I wish someone had told me more about her. Ben looked ashamed. Sometimes a town keeps quiet because grief teaches it bad manners. Lydia touched his arm, forgiving him more than he had asked. Then she mounted Juniper. Caleb rode beside her out of Cedar Bend as the sun fell west. They did not take the main road long. If Voss meant to stop them, he would expect the easy way. Caleb led them through a cattle trail that crossed the low hills, where dry grass brushed their stirrups and the wind smelled of sage. For hours they rode. At first Lydia sat straight, stiff with purpose. But as evening deepened, Caleb saw weariness enter her shoulders. She had been carrying too much for too many days. When Juniper stumbled once on a hidden stone, Caleb reached out, but Lydia steadied the mare herself. I have her, she said. I know. This time his words held no argument, only trust. Lydia glanced at him, and in the violet dusk, he saw gratitude pass through her eyes before she looked ahead again. They reached Red Hollow after moonrise. It was not much of a place, only a dry wash between red stone walls where travelers sometimes camped out of the wind. Caleb built a small fire with scrub wood while Lydia rubbed down the horses. The flames caught slowly, then lifted, throwing warm light over their tired faces. They ate hard bread, dried apples, and a little of Hattie's peach preserves. Lydia took one bite and closed her eyes. I had forgotten sweetness could feel like mercy, she said. Caleb watched the fire instead of her. Hattie said hard things need it. She is right too often. She would say not often enough. For the first time since the courthouse, Lydia laughed. It was small and tired, but it was real. Caleb held that sound carefully, as if it were a match in wind. Later, wrapped in blankets on opposite sides of the fire, Lydia spoke into the dark. Caleb. Yes. If we find the contract, and the land is safe, what then? He looked across the flames. Then you keep your home. That is not what I asked. The fire cracked softly. Caleb knew what she meant. The question from the dance hall had not vanished. It had only been pushed aside by danger. He sat up slowly. Then I ask you properly, without a joke in front of half the town, and with enough courage to stand by the answer. Lydia turned her face toward him. Firelight moved along her cheek. And if I am too tired of waiting? His chest tightened. Then I will have earned that. The honesty settled between them, painful but clean. Before Lydia could answer, one of the horses raised its head. Caleb went still. From somewhere above the hollow came the soft slide of gravel under a boot. Then another. Someone was on the ridge watching their fire. Caleb lifted one hand toward Lydia, not touching her, only warning her to stay still. The fire snapped between them. Above the hollow, the ridge was a jagged black line against the stars. For a moment, Caleb heard nothing but the wind sliding through stone and the slow breathing of the horses. Then gravel shifted again. Lydia sat up, blanket falling from her shoulders. Her face was pale in the firelight, but she did not cry out. Caleb reached for the rifle beside his saddle. He kept it low, not raised, not yet. He had no wish to turn a dark shape into a tragedy because fear moved faster than sense. Who's there? He called. No answer came. Juniper stamped once. Caleb moved toward the horses, keeping his body between Lydia and the ridge. He hated how exposed the hollow suddenly felt. The red stone walls that had seemed like shelter now felt like a trap with high sides. Then a voice came from above them. Don't shoot, Walker. Caleb knew that voice. Frank Marlowe stepped into sight at the edge of the ridge, one hand raised, the other gripping a small bedroll. His hat sat crooked, and dust covered the front of his coat as if he had ridden hard and fallen once or twice along the way. Lydia stood so quickly the blanket slid to the ground. Frank. Her cousin climbed down the slope awkwardly, slipping on loose shale. Caleb did not lower the rifle until Frank reached the flat ground and turned both empty palms toward the fire. "What are you doing here?" Caleb asked. Frank looked at Lydia, then away. Shame followed him like a shadow. "I came to help." Lydia's face hardened. "You have helped enough." The words struck Frank, and he accepted them without defense. He moved no closer to the fire. "I deserve that," he said, "but I know the North Road. Voss sent Pike and 2 men ahead by the main crossing. They mean to delay you near Mercer's bridge." Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Delay us how?" Frank swallowed. "A loose board, a frightened horse, a missing ferry rope, something that looks like bad luck." Lydia looked into the fire, anger bright in her eyes. "Men like him even make cruelty tidy." "I heard them in the hotel," Frank said. "Voss does not want trouble with the law. He only needs you to miss Friday noon." Caleb lowered the rifle fully. "Why tell us?" Frank's hand went to his coat pocket. He drew out a folded paper worn at the creases. "Because I found this after you left." Lydia did not move. Frank stepped forward and held it out. "It was tucked behind the lining of your father's old ledger at the courthouse. I should have seen it years ago. Maybe I did see it and looked away. I do not know anymore." Caleb watched Lydia's hand as she took the paper. It trembled, but she unfolded it with care. The firelight was dim, so Caleb brought the lantern closer. The page was not the contract. It was a letter written in a woman's hand, gentle but firm. Lydia read the first line and stopped breathing. "My dearest Mercy," she whispered. "Her mother." The night seemed to lean in around them. Lydia read silently at first, then her voice broke and she could not finish. Caleb saw the pain cross her face, not sharp like a fresh wound, but deep like a door opened into a room long sealed. "Read it," she said, holding the letter toward Caleb. "Please." Caleb took it, careful as if the paper were living skin. The letter was from Lydia Marlowe to her sister Mercy Whitcomb, written shortly before Lydia died. In simple words, Lydia asked Mercy to keep the trunk safe if Thomas ever sent it away. She wrote that the land was meant for Lydia, no matter what grief or pride made men do after she was gone. She wrote that Thomas was a good man drowning in sorrow before sorrow had even arrived. She wrote that her daughter had her own heart and must never be made to beg for what was already hers. Caleb's voice grew rough before he reached the end. The last line was the hardest. "Tell my Lydia that land is not just dirt. It is a place where a woman can stand straight." Lydia covered her mouth with one hand. Frank looked down, tears catching in the dust on his face. "I am sorry," he said. "I was jealous of what you had, your father's name, the farm, folks speaking kindly of you. I never thought about what it cost you to keep it." Lydia folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she walked to Frank. Caleb thought she might slap him. He would not have blamed her. Frank seemed to expect it too, for he did not lift his head. Instead, Lydia said, "You cannot mend a fence by staring at the broken rail." Frank looked up. "You ride with us," she said. "You help us get to Abilene. Then you stand in Cedar Bend and tell the truth about what Voss did, even if every eye in town is on you." Frank nodded quickly. "I will." "No," Lydia said. "Do not answer like a scared boy. Answer like a man who understands the weight of what he broke." Frank straightened with effort. "I will stand and tell the truth." Caleb looked at Lydia then, and love moved through him so quietly and surely it frightened him. Not the kind of feeling born from beauty, though she was beautiful in the firelight with tears still on her cheeks. This was something stronger. He loved the mercy in her that still demanded courage. He loved the steadiness of her pain. He loved that she could be wounded and still choose what kind of woman she meant to be. If Lydia's strength moved your heart, remember this moment, because sometimes the bravest thing on the frontier was not drawing a weapon. It was choosing truth when bitterness would have been easier. They put out the fire before dawn and took the older cattle trail west of Mercer's bridge. Frank led them through narrow draws and dry creek beds, places Caleb would not have trusted without a guide. Twice they saw riders far off on the main road, small dark figures against the morning glare. Pike's men, most likely. They did not see Caleb's party. By afternoon, clouds gathered low and heavy. Cold rain began to fall, turning dust to red paste. Lydia rode with her mother's letter inside her coat and the deed in her saddlebag. She said little, but Caleb saw her touch the letter now and then, as if making sure the voice of her mother had not vanished. At dusk, they reached the old way station 10 miles short of Abilene. The roof leaked in 2 places, and the stove smoked badly, but it was shelter. Frank went to see to the horses. Lydia stood near the window, rain streaking the glass, her face turned toward the dark road. Caleb came beside her. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you." "I will when you do." She looked at him, tired but softer now, still watching over things. "Trying to stand where I should have stood sooner." Lydia's eyes filled again, but this time she did not look away. "Caleb, when this is over, do not ask me because you feel guilty." "I will not." "Do not ask because you think saving my land earns my heart." His voice was quiet. "I know it does not." "Then why?" He held her gaze. "Because somewhere between a mule and my oats and your mother's letter in the rain, I understood that home is not only land. Sometimes it is the person who makes you want to be better than you were yesterday." Lydia's lips parted, but before she could answer, Frank burst through the door, soaked and breathless. "Riders," he said, 3 of them coming fast from the south road. Caleb turned toward the window. Through the rain and dark, lanterns were moving toward the way station. The lanterns came closer through the rain, bobbing like angry fireflies in the dark. Caleb moved first. He took Lydia by the arm and guided her away from the window, gentle but firm. Frank barred the door with a cracked chair, though anyone determined could have kicked it aside. The old way station groaned in the wind. Rain drummed the roof hard enough to drown the horses stamping outside. "Pike?" Lydia asked. Frank nodded, breath still uneven. "I saw his coat when lightning hit, 2 men with him." Caleb crossed to the back wall and lifted a loose shutter. Beyond it lay a narrow wash, black with mud and rainwater. "Can the horses pass there?" Frank shook his head. "Not in this storm. The ground drops hard after the bend." Lydia pressed one hand against her coat, where her mother's letter rested. "Then we face them." "No," Caleb said. She looked at him sharply. He lowered his voice. "Facing does not always mean standing in the doorway and letting wicked men choose the shape of the hour." Before Lydia could answer, a fist struck the door. "Open up," Pike called from outside. "Miss Marlowe, there is no need to make this unpleasant." Lydia's chin lifted. "It became unpleasant when you crept after a woman in the rain." A pause followed, then Pike gave a thin laugh. Caleb took the oilcloth packet with the deed from Lydia's saddlebag and handed it back to her. "Keep it close." "I already am." "I mean closer." She slipped it beneath her shawl. Her hand trembled, but her eyes did not. Pike knocked again. "We only wish to speak. Mr. Voss has no desire for scandal. He is prepared to offer a generous settlement, enough money for Miss Marlowe to begin elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Lydia whispered, and anger warmed the word. "As if a life can be folded and carried like a spare shirt." Caleb stepped near the door but did not open it. "You can speak through wood." Pike's voice hardened. "You are interfering in bank business, Walker." "No, I am standing in a room." "You are aiding a delay." "I thought you said you came to speak." There was another pause. One of the horses outside snorted. A man muttered something Caleb could not catch. Then Pike said, "The roads are washing out. Mercer's bridge may not hold by morning. If Miss Marlowe has sense, she will turn back tonight and accept what cannot be changed." Lydia moved beside Caleb. "Tell Mr. Voss the land was my mother's before it was ever my father's. Tell him I am going to Abilene. Tell him if he wants to buy something, he can buy himself a conscience if any store still carries one." Frank let out a nervous breath that almost became a laugh. Outside, Pike's pleasant tone disappeared. "You will regret this, Pride." "No," Lydia said. "I have regretted silence. Pride has at least kept me standing." The door handle rattled. Caleb set one hand flat against the wood. "Do not." The rattling stopped. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then footsteps moved away through mud. The lanterns shifted, and the riders drew back toward the road, but Caleb did not trust it. "They are waiting," he said. Frank nodded, "likely by the stable." Lydia turned toward the back shutter. "You said the wash drops after the bend." It does, Frank said. But before the bend. Frank looked at her, then at Caleb. It runs behind the cattle pens. Caleb understood. Can we lead the horses through on foot? In this rain, maybe. Maybe is better than waiting for Pike to grow brave. They moved without another word. Caleb doused the lamp. Frank opened the back shutter, and the storm rushed in cold and wet. One by one, they slipped out into the muddy dark. The next hour became a blur of rain, frightened horses, and careful steps along the wash. Lydia led Juniper with her head bent against the weather. Twice her boots slid, and twice she caught herself before Caleb could reach her. Not because she did not need help, but because she had learned too long to save herself first. At last the wash widened near a line of scrub cottonwoods. Behind them, the way station was only a dim shape. Ahead, the Abilene road stretched black beneath the storm. They rode before dawn. By mid-morning, the rain had softened to mist. Abilene rose out of the gray like a tired promise, all mud streets, wagon wheels, cattle pens, and smoke. Lydia looked at the town with hollow eyes, worn thin by cold and fear. "Blue shutters," she said. They found the boarding house near the south yards. The sign above the porch showed a white dove, faded by years of weather. A woman with silver hair opened the door before Caleb could knock twice. She looked at Lydia, and the years fell from her face. "Elena," she whispered. Lydia's lips parted. "No, I am Lydia." Mercy Whitcomb gripped the doorframe as if the name had struck her through the heart. Then she reached out with both hands and touched Lydia's face, her fingers shaking. "My sister's eyes," Mercy said. "Dear Lord, you have my sister's eyes." Lydia stood stiff for 1 second, then folded into the old woman's arms. The sound she made was not quite a sob. It was smaller, like something locked away for years had finally found air. Inside, Mercy gave them towels, hot coffee, and no questions until Lydia could speak. Then the story came out in pieces. The debt, the auction, Voss, Frank's guilt, the letter found at Red Hollow. Mercy held Eleanor's letter and wept silently over it. "The trunk is upstairs," she said at last. "Your father sent it after the funeral. Later he wrote asking for it back, but the letter came after I had already moved twice. By the time I answered, no reply came." She led Lydia up a narrow stair to a small room under the roof. There, beneath a quilt and 2 hat boxes, sat a cedar trunk with brass hinges gone green. Mercy opened it with a key she wore around her neck. The scent of cedar and old lavender rose into the room. Inside lay a folded cream dress, a child's hair ribbon, a small Bible, several letters, and at the very bottom, wrapped in blue cloth, a legal paper with 3 seals and Eleanor Whitcomb's name written clear as morning. Lydia sank to her knees. Caleb stood in the doorway and watched her lift the contract with both hands. He knew without reading every line that it was what they had come for. Mercy read it aloud anyway. The land was protected under Eleanor's family inheritance. It was to pass to her daughter, not to be sold, pledged, or seized for Thomas Marlowe's private debts. Frank covered his face. Lydia held the paper to her chest, beside her mother's letter. For the first time since the dance hall, hope did not look like a dangerous thing on her face. Then a bell rang downstairs. Mercy went to the window, her face changed. Caleb crossed the room. Down in the muddy street, Daniel Voss was stepping from a hired carriage, his coat dry beneath a black umbrella. Beside him stood Edmund Pike, smiling up at the boarding house as if he had arrived exactly on time. Mercy's voice turned cold. "That man came here yesterday asking about the trunk." Lydia rose slowly, the contract in her hand. Caleb looked from the street to the paper, then toward the gray road that led back to Cedar Bend and Friday's auction. They had found the truth. Now they had to get it home. Daniel Voss entered Mercy Whitcomb's boarding house as if every room in the West belonged to him until proven otherwise. He stepped inside with Edmund Pike behind him, both men carrying the smell of rain, horse leather, and trouble. Mercy stood at the bottom of the stairs, one hand on the rail, her silver hair pinned tight and her back straight. "This is a private house," she said. Voss removed his hat with smooth manners. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I only came to prevent a mistake." From the stair landing, Lydia looked down at him with her mother's contract pressed beneath her shawl. Caleb stood beside her. Frank stood a step behind, pale but steady. "The mistake," Lydia said, "was believing fear could keep buried what love had already protected." Voss looked up. For the first time since Caleb had known him, the man's confidence slipped. It was gone only a breath, then returned with polish laid over panic. "I assume you found some old family paper," Voss said. "Old papers can be misunderstood." Mercy came down one step, not by the woman who signed as witness. Lydia turned toward her aunt. Mercy reached into the pocket of her apron and drew out a small pair of spectacles. "I was there when Alina signed that contract. Our father insisted on it. He feared Thomas was a good man with a soft will and too much pride. He wanted Lydia protected before she was even born." Voss's jaw tightened. Pike spoke quickly. A witness memory after so many years may not hold weight. Mercy looked at him like he was a stain on clean linen. "Then the courthouse seal will." Caleb saw Pike's face change. The contract was not only signed by family. It was recorded, sealed, and lawful. Voss had known enough to fear it. That was why he had chased them through rain. That was why he had tried to reach Mercy first. Lydia stepped down the stairs slowly. Each step sounded clear in the quiet house. "My mother left me land," she said. "My father left me debt. I can mourn them both without letting one destroy what the other meant to save." Frank came forward then, his hat crushed in both hands. He faced Lydia first. "I will tell the county clerk everything," he said. "I will tell them Pike paid me to copy records. I will tell them I spoke of your father's desk. I will tell them I was weak, and I will not dress it up to make myself look smaller than my guilt." Lydia's eyes softened, though her voice stayed firm. "Then start now." They left Abilene before noon with Mercy beside them in a hired wagon, the trunk tied safely beneath a canvas cover. Voss and Pike followed part of the way, but they did not interfere. Men like them preferred shadows, and daylight had begun to gather too many witnesses. The ride back to Cedar Bend felt longer than the road to Abilene. Rain had washed the dust down and left the world clean and raw. Lydia kept the contract inside her coat. Caleb rode near her, not crowding, not leading, only staying close enough that if she reached out, his hand would be there. Once near sunset, she looked at him and said, "You did not try to take charge today." "I thought about it. I know. I am learning when not to." She gave him the smallest smile, a useful skill in a husband. The words struck him so hard, he nearly lost hold of the reins. Lydia looked ahead, cheeks pink from wind or something warmer. "Do not fall off your horse, Caleb. I said useful, not certain." He laughed then, tired and full-hearted, and the sound carried over the wet grass. They reached Cedar Bend on Friday morning, less than 2 hours before noon. The courthouse steps were already crowded. Word of the auction had spread, and so had rumors. Amos Bell stood with papers in hand, looking miserable. Pike stood beside him, stiff as a fence post. Voss waited near the road, his face calm but his eyes sharp. Then Lydia walked up the steps with Mercy on one side and Caleb on the other. The crowd quieted. Lydia did not shout, she did not weep. She placed the contract in Amos Bell's hands and watched him read. His spectacles slid down his nose. His mouth opened once, closed, then opened again. "This land," Amos said slowly, "was held under separate inheritance. It could not lawfully be pledged for Thomas Marlowe's personal debt." Pike reached for the paper. Amos pulled it back. Frank stepped into the open before fear could change his mind. His voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as he spoke. He told the truth about copied records, about Pike's questions, about Voss's interest in the rail spur. By the end, no one in the crowd looked at Voss with admiration. Old Ben Rollins removed his hat. Hattie Loomis folded her arms and stared Pike down so hard he looked away. Voss gave a thin smile. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Lydia said, "this is the end of one." The auction was canceled. The bank withdrew its claim until the debt could be sorted against Thomas Marlowe's estate, not Lydia's land. Pike left Cedar Bend before sundown. Voss remained 2 days longer trying to salvage his plans, but men stopped taking his meetings. Women stopped opening their doors. Even Amos Bell found enough backbone to refuse him. By Sunday, Voss rode out beneath a gray sky with no farewell but the creak of his own wagon wheels. Justice did not arrive with thunder. It came through paper, memory, confession, and a woman who refused to let her mother's voice be buried. That evening, Lydia returned to her porch with the cedar trunk beside the door. Mercy sat inside by the stove, reading old letters with tears and smiles trading places on her face. Frank had gone to repair the broken pasture rail without being asked. Caleb stood at the bottom step, hat in hand. Lydia looked at him. "You came to speak." "I did. No fence post this time." "No. No mule to blame." "Not today." She waited, and the whole valley seemed to hold its breath with her. Caleb climbed one step, then stopped. "Lydia Marlowe, I loved you when I was too foolish to name it. I loved you when you argued over oats, when you stood straight before men who wanted you small, when you forgave less than mercy but more than pride required. I do not ask because I helped save your land. I ask because you have become the place my heart rides toward, even before I know I am moving." Lydia's eyes filled. Caleb's hand trembled around his hat brim. "Will you marry me?" For a long moment, she only looked at him. Then she stepped close, took his hat from his hands, and set it on the porch rail. "I was wondering when that brave man would finally ask," she whispered. "Yes," he asked. She smiled through her tears. "Yes, Caleb, with all my stubborn heart, yes." If this ending stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more emotional Wild West stories where love, truth, and courage find their way home. Years later, folks in Cedar Bend still told the story of Lydia Marlowe's ride to Abilene, though Lydia always said the real story began with a mule eating oats where he had no right to be. Caleb would claim the mule had better sense than most men, since he crossed the fence first. And on quiet evenings, when the sun turned the Wyoming hills gold, Lydia and Caleb sat together on the repaired porch, Mercy's cedar trunk safe inside, Moses the mule grazing where he pleased, and the old contract framed above the hearth. The land remained Lydia's. The home became theirs. And every time the wind moved softly through the plum trees, it sounded almost like a leaner Marlowe whispering that her daughter was standing straight at last.